week 4 of the fantasy football season. And here's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So right now, I'm not going to spend too much time on these top guys here. You know what you're going to get week in and week out from most of these players. You're going to get elite performances, big numbers. And this week here in an easy matchup with the Carolina Panthers that really can't stop anyone defensively. It wouldn't be surprising to me if we see Justin Jefferson have 30, 35 fantasy points in PPR leagues in this one. Number 2, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. Tua, one of the most dangerous combinations, if not the dangerous combination in all the NFL. And this week, I know it's a tough matchup on paper at the Buffalo Bills, but no one in the NFL could cover Tyreek Hill. This guy's got crazy speed. He's a good route runner, and him and Tua on the same page, and it's like they have ESP. So right now, even in a tough matchup, Hill's matchup proof, and I got him too. Number 3, staying in the same game, Stephon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. So Stephon Diggs, him and Josh Allen, it looks like they ironed out their problems in the offseason. And so far, Diggs, he's been putting up elite numbers to start the season. And this week here versus Miami secondary, that isn't all that great. I know Miami, they're scoring a lot of points, but they're giving up some points as well. We saw last week Sutton go for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns in that ball game. So right here, I think Stephon Diggs in this ball game has another good one. And this could be a potential shootout between these AFC East rivals. Number 4, Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Keenan Allen, last season, I know he missed 7 ball games with injury, but this year he's come back with a vengeance. And so far off to a monster start with 2 monster games in a row, over 30 fantasy points in week 2 and over 50 fantasy points in week 3 for Keenan Allen, where he came off 18 catches, 215 receiving yards, and also 49 pass yards on a trick play for a touchdown to Mike Williams. So right now he's playing good football. Kellen Moore's really finding ways to get Keenan Allen the ball in this offense. And this week versus a weak-rated defense, I got him at 4. Number 5, Davante Adams of the Vegas Raiders. Davante Adams, what a ball game he had last week. 160 yards and 2 touches in that ball game. And this week, a good matchup versus a pretty weak Los Angeles Chargers secondary. So Adams, he's pretty much the only guy producing big numbers right now for this Raider team, that they're struggling at the gate 1-2 on the season. So right now, Adams is frustrated. And I think this week he takes his frustrations out that this team isn't having a winning culture on the Chargers, and once again tries to win it by himself this one. And I got him at 5. Number 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So St. Brown so far has been a solid wide receiver since he came into the league a few seasons ago. And him and Jared Goff have a great rapport. And it seems like each and every game, this guy's at least 80, 90 yards with a potential touchdown. So this week in a potential shootout Thursday Night Football tonight, I know obviously most of these games are high scoring with no defense. I think he has another good ball game this week here, St. Brown at the Packers. And their secondary's banged up as well with injuries to Jair Alexander. We'll see if he plays. And some of the key components. Number 7, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Jamar Chase finally got it going last week with over 140 yards receiving. And that's the success that this Bengal team needs if they want to get back in the thick of things here, 1-2. So Jamar Chase, 140 yards last week. Week 10 Tennessee secondary, where we've seen wide receivers all season and even last season have big ball games. And I think Jamar Chase, they're going to try to force feed him a lot in this one once again. And it worked in week 3, obviously, versus the Rams. And this week, I think we'll see more of the same here, moving him around in the formation and making design plays to get him open easier. Number 8, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So we know a few weeks ago, Brown and Hurts had the sideline problem where they were arguing. But last week, they were on the same page. Brown had over 120 yards receiving. And this week, a good matchup versus a weak Washington Commanders secondary. So this Eagle team's rolling. They're playing great football. Jalen Hurts is getting the ball out quick to his wide receivers. And A.J. Brown, we know he's one of the better wide receivers in the league. And this week, once again, he has a good one. Number 9, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave this week probably will be out Derek Carr in this one. But Jameis Winston, we know he's a gunslinger, but he could get that deep ball down the field pretty well with Winston. We saw it many seasons ago with the Bucs where he did throw 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. But this is what I mean with Winston. He's going to have some great games, and some games he's going to turn it over. But guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin had good seasons for Winston. So this week, if it is Winston at the quarterback position, I think he could get the ball to Olave. This Tampa Bay secondary isn't all that great. We just saw A.J. Brown carve him up in that ball game, and I got him at 9. Number 10, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. And Nacua, the first 2 games of his NFL career, 25 catches he had in that. And last week, he had a little bit of a down game, but still had over 10 fantasy points. So right now this week in a good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts, where I think he could exploit that secondary here, Puka Nacua, where we know he's been a PPR machine so far this season. He can run all the routes, and Sean McVay gets him in good schemes to get open. So this week I think he has a big ball game once again. After last week, a little bit of a down for him, even though it was still pretty solid in my opinion. Number 11, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb, each year he's improving for this Cowboy team and fantasy owners. And last week it was just a stinker all around for this Cowboy team. Not much fantasy production from their main guys. But CeeDee Lamb this week versus the Patriots, I think Dak's going to lean on him heavily early and often in this game. We know he's a playmaker as Lamb. And a couple seasons ago, he had a big ball game versus the New England Patriots. So this week here, I think once again, Lamb's going to have a good one, bounce back, and this Dallas team needs the win, especially with San Francisco next week, and they got to rely on Lamb in this game. Number 12, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Smith, he's going to have some games where he goes off, and then some games he'll be a quiet pedestrian, 5-6 fantasy points. But this week here versus the Washington Commanders secondary that hasn't stopped anyone so far this season. We saw the Bills last week go for 37 points. We saw the Broncos put up a high score in week 2 versus them. And even Joshua Dobbs and the Cardinals in week 1 played a good football game in terms of passing the football. So Devonta Smith, we know, is an explosive wide receiver. He could burn pretty much any corner in the league. And this week here versus Washington, I think they put up points early and often is this Philly team. And I got Smith at 12, number 13, Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So a London game here for Ridley and the Jags. And he's versus his former team, the Atlanta Falcons, that pretty much just gave him away last season at the trade deadline after suspended for a season. And now he's back as Ridley. In week 1, he had a monster ball game. But the last 2 weeks, he has been quiet, is Calvin Ridley. But this week here, I think he bounces back with a good ball game. And obviously, any player who's versing their former team, you know, they get the juices flowing a little bit extra to stick it to their former team, and I think Ridley does in this one, where this Atlanta secondary isn't all that great. Number 14, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Mike Evans, his kryptonite, he is versing this week here in Marcus Lattimore. We know these guys, they've had words. We know they've thrown punches and stuff over the last few seasons, but so far, Mike Evans, he's been a top 10 wide receiver easily in fantasy football over the first 3 weeks of the season. And this week, I know it's a tough matchup, but with his potential and just the way him and Baker Mayfield have been on the same page this season, it's tough to shy away from Mike Evans and really lower him down in the rankings. So right now, going to be a little bit conservative, have him at number 14. But if he has a big game, it wouldn't surprise me. And if Lattimore has his number once again in this one, it wouldn't surprise me. Well, no way I'm going to lower Mike Evans down there, because like I said, this year, he's been big play potential. Him and Baker on the same page, and he's had some big games already this year. Number 15, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. So Amari Cooper, he's been a solid trade acquisition over the last season and a half here for this Brown team, where they pretty much only gave up a 5th rounder to get him from the Cowboys. And him and Deshaun Watson, they're starting to build their rapport. Cooper, he's one of the better route runners in the league when healthy, obviously. Health has been an issue with him, but he does play through it. But that's when he doesn't produce. But so far this season, he's been healthy, like I mentioned, is Cooper, and he's going out there and making plays. And this week here versus a banged-up Baltimore secondary, I think he has a good ball game. And we even saw Michael Pittman last week have a good one. Number 16, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So we know Deebo's a playmaker. We know he's a gadget guy in this offense. And he's obviously the engine as well that really runs this offense. We saw last week he broke a lot of tackles, a lot of yards after catch, and that's where the San Francisco team took off and ran away with that ball game. So this week, I know he's banged up with a rib injury a little, is Deebo, but versus a pretty weak secondary with no Buda Baker. I think Brock Purdy in this 9-team picks this Arizona secondary apart. Deebo will get his numbers and have a good game. And I got him at 16, number 17, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So it looks like Waddle's going to be a full go here after having a concussion, missing last week's game. And they didn't miss him, scoring 70 points. But this week at Buffalo, they're definitely going to need him if they want to pull this ball game out, obviously, where it's just another big weapon on the field that could spread the field, make plays. And you want to talk about yards after catch. Jalen Waddle does a lot of that as well. So this week here, it is a tough matchup at Buffalo. I know he's coming off the concussion. So he practiced Wednesday as Waddle, ready to go. It looks like no restraint. And right now I'm firing him up as the number 2 wide receiver at 17, 18, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So far this Bengal team, just together with Higgins and Chase, couldn't put in a big ball game together. So Higgins, he had a good week too with 2 touchdowns. Last week in week 3 was a pedestrian ball game. He got banged up, left the game for a little bit, and came back. But this week at the Tennessee Titans, they're one of the worst teams in the league at covering wide receivers. We saw it a few weeks ago with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both having monster ball games. And this week I could see a similar type of scenario where Higgins and Chase have good ones. So this week here versus a weak secondary, this passing game trying to get going. I got him in number 18, number 19, Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. So we know Ayuk, he missed that Thursday night football game. But him and Brock Purdy have good chemistry now over the last season and change here. Brock Purdy's been great for this Niners team. He's only pretty much had one bad game. Ayuk, we know, is a good route runner. And he's a guy where defenses are rolling attention to George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, where it keeps him on one-on-one coverage. So this week here in a division matchup versus a weak secondary in Arizona, I think Brandon Ayuk has a good ball game once again. And I got him at 19, number 20, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. So the Seahawks have a good matchup at a young New York Giants secondary with a bunch of rookies in the secondary. And DK Metcalf, we know he's a matchup nightmare with his height, his jump ball ability to go up there to the highest point and get the football. And I think this week here, he's going to bully this Giants secondary. And we've seen this secondary get torched over the last few weeks. Deebo in week 3. We saw Hollywood Brown had a good ball game in week 2. And CeeDee Lamb, even though it was most of the Cowboys' defense in that one winning the game, went for 77 yards. So I think Metcalf in this game has a good one, and him and Geno have been on the same page for the last season and a half here. Next guy's Tutu Atwell at 21 of the Los Angeles Rams. So Atwell, he was a player not even on the radar at all this season, only maybe in the deepest of leagues. But right now, he's getting an opportunity. We saw some flashes from him last season, and right now he's been a gadget guy and a deep ball threat for Matthew Stafford in this Ram team. So him and Nakua have come out of nowhere. They're putting up solid fantasy numbers. And this week indoors on the fast turf, it's a great matchup with the Indianapolis Colts. Even though I know they held Baltimore down, but that indoor turf is something different. And I think Tutu once again could have a big ball game, where this year so far he's had double-digit fantasy days in the first 2 out of 3 weeks. Number 22, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Michael Pittman this season with quarterbacks who actually could throw the ball down the field has been pretty well. Last season when Matt Ryan couldn't get the job done. I know a few years ago with Phillip Rivers he was all right, but this season with Richardson and Gardner Minshew so far, he's been solid. And this week in a ball game where it's going to be back and forth, I think, between these teams, it could be a solid game for Pittman, where I could see him get 80, 90 yards in this one and possibly find the end zone. 23, Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. So like I mentioned with Metcalf, young Giants secondary, a lot of rookies on it. Tyler Lockett, it seems like after he has a bad ball game, he comes back with a big one. And we saw it in week 1, he didn't do much. Week 2, 25 fantasy points. And then last week, only 3 catches, 34 yards. So this week here in a good matchup at the weak Giants secondary, I think Lockett bounces back and has a good one. Number 24, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So right now, Odell Beckham's been banged up with the ankle injury. Rashad Bateman really hasn't shown much. And this Raven team, they got to get this passing game improved a little bit in this one. And possibly, I know Denzel Ward could be on Zay Flowers in this game, but I still think Flowers could be a decent receiver as your number 2 or flex option this week, depending what receivers you have. And he's a guy that could be a playmaker, and they use him as a gadget guy as well. So they got to be a little creative more in this offense over there in Baltimore, because you pretty much know the ball's either going to Mark Andrews or Lamar's going to be running it. So this week here, I think they're going to find ways to get Flowers back as a mainstay in this offense here. After the last couple weeks, it's tailed off a little bit after a big week 1. So I got him at 24-25, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. So Addison, so far in his rookie season, he's made an impact. And he's just opening up the field for everyone else as well with Hawkinson and Jefferson. And he's a deep ball threat and a playmaker, is Addison. A perfect fit for this offense, even though it's hard to believe Minnesota's 0-3, but that's more to do with the turnovers and the defense. But in terms of production and putting up points, I think Addison in a weak Carolina secondary could have a good one this week. Number 26, George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So George Pickens, the last 2 weeks operating as the number 1 guy with Deontay Johnson out with injury, has been playing good football. And him and Kenny Pickett last season towards the end of the year had good rapport. And so far this season, Pickens is going out there and he's making plays. This week at Houston, I think he could be a solid 2-3 flex option is Pickens. He's a speed wide receiver. He can make the acrobatic and the highlight reel grabs, but he just has to be a little bit more of a consistent route runner is Pickens. And as the weeks go on, he's going to get better as Pickens. But this week, he put him down in the rankings just a little bit at 26, 27. Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So Garrett Wilson, he's got potential to be a top 10 wide receiver or even higher for the majority of his career here if he has a quarterback. But obviously right now he don't have a quarterback. Is Garrett Wilson. Zach Wilson's one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. This Jet team, they're not trying to stretch the field at all. And they're not using Garrett Wilson in any way to get him the football. And this week here, he's going to be a vocal point of this Chief defense where they're going to dare Zach Wilson to try to beat him and probably have double coverage with a safety over the top on Garrett Wilson. So right now, the last couple weeks, the numbers have gone down. He's pretty much been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver so far as Garrett Wilson. And obviously, teams, they're paying attention to him more and more week in and week out. So this week, it's hard to grade him down this low at 27. But like I said, the production hasn't been there. And it's obviously not his fault. 28, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So him and Trevor Lawrence last season, they built good chemistry. And so far this season, the last 2 games here, they've gotten it going once again with Kirk finding the end zone in both of them. So right here, London ball game, Jacksonville's second home, and it's a good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. That their defense isn't all that great. We saw last week St. Brown go for over 100 yards in that ball game. We saw Sam Laporta go off. And this week here, I think Christian Kirk has another decent ball game and is a solid number 2, 3 flex option. Number 29, Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. So Tank Dell quickly emerging over there as a number 2, even number 1 type of option for this Houston Texan team over the last few weeks. Once Noah Brown went on injured reserve, he was in on all 3 wide receiver sets, and we saw last week catch a deep ball for over 60 yards as Tank Dell. So Dell's got that explosive speed. He's obviously got to work on his route running, but this Houston Texan team probably will be trailing in this one a majority of the ball game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, a tough defense. I think Dell could get a lot of garbage time in this game if it comes down to that, or he could just keep making big plays like he did last week. So right now, well, he's off to a hot start, especially the last 2 weeks here is Dell. I got him at 29, number 30, Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers. Adam Thielen, when he signed with the Panthers, I didn't think he would be a guy that really had much left in the tank, but so far, he's off to a good start with this Panther team, including last week having a monster fantasy game, over 25 fantasy points. So this week, another revenge game that I like to talk about versus the Minnesota Vikings, that obviously they cut him loose in the offseason. This week, Adam Thielen's going to want to show up his former team. Got rid of him and took the rookie Jordan Addison to take his spot. So right now, Thielen, he's running his routes, he's making plays. And if Andy Dalton's a quarterback, I think it bumps up his value a little bit more as well, because with Bryce Young, the rapport wasn't there, but for whatever reason, the 2 veterans, Dalton and Thielen, were on the same page in last week's ball game, and he broke out for sure. 31, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. Moore this season has 2 good ball games. Week 2, he went over 100 yards. And last week, I know it was garbage time, but he had 41 yards on 3 catches with a touchdown. And this week here, a good matchup versus a Denver team that just got shredded, obviously, by the Miami Dolphins. Even though I know Surtain got burned by Tyreek Hill, I'm not saying DJ Moore is Tyreek Hill, so I think Surtain can hold them to a decent amount in this game. That's why Moore's a little lower on the rankings. And this Bear offense just can't move the football consistently. But I think DJ Moore still is a flex option this week. Could be solid for owning 32, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So Nico Collins, the first 2 weeks, he had nice ball games. The last week took a little bit of a step back to Tank out. But this is a ball game where I think it's going to be tough to run, obviously, for this Houston Texan team. And they could be trailing early in this one where they're going to have to throw 35, 40 times. So right now, Nico Collins, he's a good route runner. He's going out there. He's making plays. Last season, we saw it as well when Brandon Cooks was hurt towards the end of the year, where Collins has the capability of being a number 1 or 2 wide receiver. So this week here versus Steelers team where, like I said, they got to attack in the passing game if they want a chance to win this game and possibly be playing a lot of catch-up. I got Collins at 32, 33, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So far, Godwin, he really hasn't done much for this Buc team. It's been pretty much Mike Evans and Rachaad White, the 2 main men in this offense. But this week here, with Lattimore most likely being on Mike Evans, I think Godwin could have a sneaky good game. We know he's one of the better possession wide receivers. We know when he really gets going and into his routes, he could be a PPR monster for fantasy owners. And we saw it in the Tom Brady era with this Tampa Bay Buc team. But so far, him and Baker Mayfield just haven't been on the same page. So you still got to wait and see with Chris Godwin. 34, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. Christian Watson last season, he took the league by storm about midseason after having a 3-touchdown ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. And then he took off after that. But so far this season, he missed the first 3 games of the year with the hamstring injury. So right now, I know Watson, he's probably ranked higher on other rankings on other websites and stuff. But right now, I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach here with Watson. He said he plans to play. We'll see when game time comes tonight if he does play. And he's been limited in practice as well. And a hamstring, obviously, with a guy with his athleticism and speed, he's definitely going to have to be 100% because he could tweak it at any time. But this week in a good matchup versus a mediocre Detroit secondary, I think Watson could be decent, but I'm tampering expectations and have him at 34-35 DeAndre Hopkins of the Tennessee Titans. So Hopkins in the offseason, when he signed with Tennessee, he was a guy that I just thought he's not going to fit this offense well, and he's definitely not going to have great fantasy value. That he just chose the money instead of going to a contender and a team with a quarterback that could get him the football. So right now it's pretty much a similar situation, but could be worse than it was in Arizona, where they pretty much had to force feed Hopkins. And he was doing good last season, no doubt about it. But this year, he hasn't done much. Tannehill, like I said, he's not that good of a quarterback, holding on to the ball too much. And the offensive line isn't great. So this week here in a matchup versus a pretty decent Cincinnati defense, I think it's going to be tough sledding once again for Hopkins. And I got him at 35 and 36th. And final wideout I'm ranking this week here is Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Courtland Sutton, the last 2 weeks, he's starting to emerge and be the main target here for Russell Wilson. We saw it last week. I know he had 2 fumble losses, but they still had confidence in going back to him, and he found the end zone in that ball game. It hasn't been talent or route running. It's always been health, the quarterback that could get him the football consistently. And so far, it looks that way. I know the Broncos are 0-3, but this Sean Payton offense, obviously, is very wide receiver friendly and quarterback friendly, where they find ways and schemes to get players open. So right now, with a good matchup in Chicago, Courtland Sutton playing well so far in the early going. I know 36 isn't a great rank, but there's so many talented wide receivers. But as the bye weeks come, he definitely could be a wide receiver to fill in and help owners. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for week 4 of the fantasy football season.